I inherited the apartment from my great-uncle George, a man I had only seen twice in my entire life. The first time was when I was 5 years old, when he gave me a massive children's encyclopedia. The second time was when I turned 25, standing right beside his polished, lacquered coffin. My mother rarely spoke about Uncle George. She used to say he'd been eccentric ever since he was a young man. He never harmed anyone and looked harmless enough on the outside, but there was always this hidden malice in his behavior. My dad used to point out that George always had an unkind, intense look in his eyes, like a psychopath. You could be standing next to him, making small talk and joking around, but you couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to snap and lunge at you. He always skipped family gatherings, and my younger sister never even saw him alive. In his final years, Uncle George became completely reclusive. Judging by his bedroom, which was packed to the ceiling with random junk, his only hobby had become the senseless hoarding of useless things. Since he had no children, the apartment was left to his nephew, my father, who without a second thought handed the keys over to me. Overjoyed, I moved in just a week and a half after the funeral. The location was prime, right near the city center, though the windows looked out into a bleak, enclosed courtyard. Despite the mountains of stale junk, I actually liked the place. The furniture, the plumbing, the renovation, everything was in good shape. I didn't plan any grand makeovers. I just did some basic cleaning, threw out the trash, and decided to leave the living room for guests while I moved my things into the bedroom. When I was done, I had a great, spacious room with wooden furniture, a bed, nightstands, a chest of drawers, and a large, heavy wardrobe. And that wardrobe, out of nowhere, it began to fill me with a vague, lingering anxiety. Behind its double doors, hanging on wooden hangers, were my uncle's old jackets, coats, and heavy padded parkas. My parents had told me not to throw them away, saying they might come in handy. I didn't argue, but that strange feeling just wouldn't go away. Lying in the dark before sleep, or just sitting in the bedroom, I constantly caught myself staring at it. I couldn't take my eyes off that wardrobe. No other room or object made me feel this way. Even a dark, open doorway at night didn't trigger my paranoia like that piece of furniture did. As I settled in and unpacked my things, gradually washing out the old man smell from the flat, the wardrobe only stood out more against the backdrop of my new life. One day, I decided to rearrange my uncle's clothes to make room for my own. But the moment I pulled those heavy doors open, the urge instantly vanished. The room smelled intensely of mothballs for the next half hour, and it only amplified my unexplainable dread. When I used to sleep in the living room, I would occasionally catch a faint rustling sound. I rarely heard anything from the neighbors, so it wasn't them. The building was quite old, so you could blame it on almost anything. But these sounds were regular. Every single night, without exception. Usually right after 11 p.m. However, the moment I officially moved into the bedroom, the rustling stopped. Instead, the creaking began. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, I would hear it, flinch, and snap my eyes open. It felt as though someone was deliberately, maliciously playing a mind game with me. To be fair, it never repeated in the middle of the night. Or maybe I was just too fast asleep to hear it. Then I started noticing that one of the wardrobe doors was slightly misaligned, sticking out. On Monday, I pushed it shut until it clicked. By Wednesday, I found it nudged forward again. If I left it alone, within 4 days, like a precise algorithm, the door would drift open just enough to leave a small, dark crack. At first, I kept a close eye on it, refusing to let it open. But eventually, I got buried in work and forgot all about it. I would come home completely exhausted and crash straight into bed, routinely flinching at the nightly creak. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking to a coworker. I shared the story about the apartment and mentioned my main source of anxiety. He looked at me with a puzzled expression and asked, "Wait, so this wardrobe constantly gives you anxiety? You hear creaks in the room and the door keeps opening by itself? Dude, that's the literal setup for a paranormal haunting." I forced a smile. What am I supposed to do? Grab my passport and run? What would I tell my parents? That I got scared of a wardrobe? My colleague laughed, but he stood by his words. Then you need to gather your courage, clench your fists, and go look inside that wardrobe in the middle of the night. It's basic psychology. Besides, if a grown man is afraid of nothing except a specific piece of furniture, there's a reason for it. Did someone scare you as a kid? Like jumped out of a closet during hide and seek? Or maybe you heard a scary story? I shook my head, but for the rest of the day, my mind kept drifting back to his words, sorting through my childhood memories. For the first time, standing on the landing with the keys in my hand, I was in no hurry to open my own front door. The automatic hallway light timed out and clicked off. Somewhere upstairs, a neighbor smoking a cigarette shuffled his boots, but I just lingered there, delaying the inevitable. When I finally went inside, I dragged my feet. First, I went to the bathroom to wash my hands, then to the kitchen for a snack, then to the living room to watch TV. Every time I walked down the hallway, I automatically averted my eyes from the cracked open bedroom door. I sat in front of the TV until late evening, until precisely 11 p.m., when I heard the rustling. My back went cold for a second, but the fear quickly turned into pure irritation. Just as my colleague had suggested, I stood up, gathered my courage, clenched my fists, and marched into the bedroom. Telling myself there was nothing to fear, I stepped inside, flicked the light switch, walked up to the wardrobe, and yanked both doors open. Behind the hanging clothes, I saw a dark, malicious face. Two manic eyes with bloodshot yellowish whites frozen in the glare of the ceiling light. The light cut through the gloom, exposing mutilated lips covered in dried blood. With a sickening, wet click, the lips parted, and inside the pitch-black void of its wide-open mouth, I caught a glimpse of rotting, yellow teeth. Pure terror struck me like a physical blow to the stomach. I stumbled backward, whipped my head toward the door, and tried to take a step, but my frozen legs refused to cooperate. One foot caught the other, and I lost my balance. A sharp, blinding pain seared through my temple. A loud crack echoed in my ears, instantly turning into a high-pitched, deafening ring. And it felt as though a black blindfold had been violently slapped over my eyes. A violent spasm rippled through my head. My breath caught, as if I were being actively choked. The last thing I experienced before blacking out was a metallic, bloody taste in my mouth. I came to around morning. I was lying in the exact same spot where I had collapsed, squeezed between the wardrobe and the bed. My head was splitting, and every slight movement brought a wave of intense nausea. With great effort, I braced myself against the wooden footboard of the bed, the very thing I had hit my head on, and dragged myself up onto the mattress. The ringing in my ears was unbelievable, like the worst hangover of my life. The room swam before my eyes, blurring double before coming back into focus. The strange face was gone from the open wardrobe. On the well-lit back wall, there were only some dark, uneven knots and stains in the wood. I felt sick to my stomach and closed my eyes. A suffocating bitterness caught in my throat. I couldn't believe I had scared myself into a literal concussion over a random stain in the wood. Worse, my brain had somehow mapped out a horrific, detailed face within it. I decided to call in sick to work. I even thought about calling an ambulance, fearing I had a severe concussion. But by midday, the pain began to fade. The wardrobe stood wide open the entire afternoon, and it didn't trigger any of those strange, creeping feelings as long as the bright sunlight was pouring through the curtains. But as evening approached, everything began to shift rapidly. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the darkness hanging over the clothes inside the wardrobe grew thicker and heavier. No matter how hard I stared, no matter how much I tried to look into that dark stain on the back wall, I could no longer see the horrifying face I had witnessed the night before. The clock read almost 10 p.m. when I finally stood up and pushed the door shut. Next, my eyes fell on my uncle's old wooden armchair sitting in the corner by the window. I felt a sudden urge to drag it over and wedge it against the wardrobe doors, just in case. I even took a step toward it, but stopped myself. Doing that would mean admitting to my own cowardice. Already burning with shame over my midnight panic attack, I couldn't let myself sink any lower. Sleep wouldn't come that night. I had spent the whole day lying in bed, and now I was desperately looking for any distraction. I lay there with my phone, pulling up a show. But exactly at 11 p.m., my peace was shattered by a low, distinct creak. I whipped my head toward the sound and froze. One of the wardrobe doors was slightly open, but before even 2 seconds could pass, something flashed inside the dark gap and yanked the door back shut until it clicked. A cold dread paralyzed me. My legs wouldn't move. My arms felt like stone, as if my body no longer belonged to me. I tried to take a deep breath, but my lungs felt frozen solid, refusing to let any air in. The chill ran up the back of my neck, locking me down even tighter than before. The show kept playing on my phone screen in the background. I couldn't make out the words anymore, and the video blurred into a single shifting blob of color. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. Was it sleep paralysis or a hallucination on the edge of waking up? But I wasn't even tired. The thought of getting out of bed and repeating last night's desperate move was even more terrifying than the drawn-out creaks and the doors opening on their own. I forced my hand to move, clench and unclench my fingers until I regained control and switched off my phone screen. The room plunged into pitch black, absolute darkness. The shadows swallowed everything. Even the distant streetlights outside were too faint to pierce the heavy curtains. And in that endless, freezing dark, another long, agonizing creak echoed through the room. I pressed my head deep into the pillow and began to slowly pull the blanket over my face, trying to hide. But the more I tried to bury myself, the more disgusted I felt. Why was I running from the problem? Why was I allowing myself to believe in the paranormal and letting childhood fears dictate my actions? Setting my jaw, I reached for my phone under the covers, turned on the flashlight, and violently threw the blanket off, blinding the wardrobe with a sharp, pale beam of light. The wardrobe was wide open. The clothes inside had been pushed violently to the sides, and on one of the outer hangers, right on my uncle's old overcoat, there were 2 pale human fingers gripping the fabric. In absolute horror, I bolted upright in bed. My head instantly began to throb, a sharp pain piercing my temples and the back of my skull. A sudden wave of dizziness pulled me sideways, threatening to throw me back onto the mattress. But I managed to extend my arm just in time to catch myself. My phone flew out of my hand, hit the hardwood floor with a loud thud, and landed face down, burying the flashlight beam. I dropped down after it, frantically slapping my hands across the floor in a desperate, blind search. Another loud creak scraped against my ears, and I distinctly heard something massive beginning to crawl out of the wardrobe. The only thing louder than my ragged breathing was a sickening, low hissing sound. It sounded exactly as if this piece of trash was holding back intense pain, forcing air through its teeth. My palms were slick with sweat from pure terror. I began to crawl forward toward where I thought the light switch was on the wall, but the room felt endless. Or maybe, losing my mind in the unfolding nightmare, I just couldn't comprehend my surroundings or the size of the bedroom. When my outstretched hand finally hit a door, I gasped out loud. Salvation was so close, but the door wouldn't budge. Damn it, it was wide open when I came in. I figured I needed to aim a bit to the left to find the exit into the hallway. I did just that. I found an opening, pushed forward, and slammed face first into heavy, dusty, hanging clothes. A flash of crimson lightning exploded behind my eyes, and my face began to rapidly go numb. I had completely botched the directions. Instead of the hallway, I had crawled straight back into the wardrobe. The hinges on the second door shrieked, and the heavy wooden panel brushed against my shoulder. It felt like an internal explosion of pure adrenaline. Completely losing it, I slammed my elbow back against the door and bolted to the right toward the actual exit. Once in the hallway, I slapped the light switch, squinted against the sudden glare, and sprinted into the kitchen to turn on the lights there, too. Without wasting a second, I grabbed a kitchen knife, caught my breath, and headed toward the front door. The bedroom, even with some light bleeding into it, still looked deeply ominous. From the entryway, the wardrobe was out of sight, and I had absolutely no desire to go any deeper back into the apartment. I grabbed my keys from the console table, quickly shoved my feet into my sneakers, and stepped out onto the building's staircase landing, locking the heavy door behind me. Out on the landing, I took a massive breath of fresh air, sat down on the concrete steps, and waved my hand to trigger the motion sensor light, scattering the darkness. The clock read 11:07 p.m. Not even 10 minutes had passed since that thing in the wardrobe had awakened, but it felt like I had been trapped in that hell for an hour. My heart was pounding so hard that my ribs ached from the pressure. A kitchen knife gleamed in my hand, and the ring of keys jingled quietly in my trembling grip. I reached for my phone to call someone. Sitting on the stairs until morning seemed even stupider than going back inside. I patted one pocket of my shorts, then the other, and as the reality set in, I let out a defeated groan. Oh my God. It was still lying face down on the floor back in the bedroom. Slowly pulling myself up, I walked back to my door and pressed my ear against the cold metal, trying to catch any sound from inside the apartment. From the other side came faint, rhythmic thuds and a barely audible shuffling sound. And then my heavy metal door suddenly shuddered. Something from the inside had struck it. Not with full force, but enough to make it vibrate. I leaped back, covering my ear. That was it. No more doubts remained. I hadn't imagined it, and I hadn't invented a monster out of childhood trauma. There was something genuinely alive walking around my apartment. Something that had crawled out of that wardrobe. Now, I just had to figure out what the hell to do next. I rang the doorbell of the neighboring apartment. I heard someone turning a key in the lock and the faint scrape of the peephole cover, but nothing else. else. "Hello?" I called out. "I'm your neighbor from next door. Can I please use your phone to make a quick call?" Silence. Grimacing, I waved at the peephole, trying to force a friendly, non-threatening smile onto my face. "Or I can just dictate the number and you can call for me. I just really need to reach my parents." Still, no one answered. Swearing under my breath, I moved to the next door. I rang, I knocked, but this time there wasn't a single sound from the other side. I moved to the fourth and final door on the floor. I rang twice, my skin breaking out in goosebumps. Hearing a blessed "Who's there?" from the inside, I repeated my entire story. I explained that I was locked out of my apartment, lying that my key had snapped off in the lock. "Show me," a raspy woman's voice demanded from behind the door. I froze, but quickly came up with an excuse. "It's stuck inside the lock. I can't pull it out. I already tried everything." "Then what's the knife for?" She cut me off. That question hit me like a physical blow. What an idiot. Who knocks on their neighbors' doors in the middle of the night holding a massive kitchen knife? The words caught in my throat. My brain fried as I desperately tried to manufacture another lie. My eyes darted around, but then she asked, "Kid, which apartment are you from?" And in her tone, even through the heavy door, I caught a distinct note of genuine sympathy. "Apartment 21, I stammered. "My uncle used to live here, and I just moved in." To my absolute shock, the lock clicked. The door drifted open slightly, but stopped short, held back by a security chain. A woman in a white nightgown peered through the gap. "Answer me honestly. Did you see someone inside the wardrobe?" It felt like a gunshot to the head. For a second, my vision went completely dark. "I did," I whispered out loud. "Just throw the knife away. Put it over there in the corner and come inside," she said, closing the door slightly to unlatch the chain. With burning cheeks, I shoved the knife under my own welcome mat, wiped the cold sweat from my forehead, and walked into my neighbor's home. The woman, who introduced herself as Elizabeth, handed me her phone, let me sit down in the kitchen, and poured me a cup of hot tea. Almost immediately, her husband stepped out of the bedroom, seemingly understanding exactly what was happening without a single word being spoken. While I dialed my dad's number, listening to the agonizingly long rings, Elizabeth's husband quietly asked her, "The wardrobe again?" She simply nodded, and her husband, grimacing, walked out of the kitchen. My dad wasn't answering, so I started frantically calling my mom. Not picking up, the neighbor sighed. "Maybe try calling their landline?" "We disconnected it a year ago," I said, feeling completely defeated. I paused, deciding to ask, "Tell me, did my uncle ever tell you anything about that wardrobe?" Elizabeth shook her head. "Nothing specific. The issue was something else entirely. He was a bit eccentric, you know. a bit touched. He used to scream so loudly at night. The walls here are thick, but we could still hear him. At first, we just thought he had a drinking problem.
What did he scream about? I pressed. About the wardrobe? No, Elizabeth shrugged. He was arguing with someone. Crying even, it sounded like. He only mentioned the wardrobe once, 2 days before he passed away. He came running to our door at midnight, just like you did.
His face was flushed, completely terrified. He said something had crawled out of the wardrobe and was following him around the flat. But what it was, or why it was following him, he never explained. He just begged to stay on our couch until morning, and then he left. 2 days later, he was gone. "Who actually found his body?" I asked. "I have no idea," the neighbor admitted. "You're the relative. I thought you knew." I shuddered and tried calling my mom again, but she still wasn't picking up. Fortunately, my younger sister, Kate, was almost always on her phone. I was terrified of misremembering the digits as I dialed her number from memory, but luck was on my side. Kate was at a friend's birthday party and didn't believe me at first when I started dumping a story about a haunted closet on her. But either I was incredibly convincing or the raw panic in my voice genuinely alarmed her. Within 30 minutes, she pulled up in a taxi alongside her boyfriend, Dennis. Dennis had a few drinks in him, but he was holding it together well and didn't seem afraid of anything. "All right, so who broke into the place? I don't get it," he asked as we stood on the landing. "Or has this guy been hiding out in the closet the whole time?" "I don't know," I admitted honestly, forcing the key into the lock. "And I don't want to know. We're grabbing my clothes and we are getting the hell out of here. I am not living in the same flat as that thing." The apartment was pitch black. Dennis reached for the switch, flipped it, and the hallway light flared to life. I turned to the guys, my stomach dropping. Everything was turned on when I left. Dennis frowned. Then who turned them off? The question hung heavily in the air. "Let's just hurry up, please," Kate whispered, visibly shaking. "Something feels really wrong here." Dennis waved us off and walked into the bedroom alone. He was gone for just over a minute. To our anxious questions, he just answered shortly, "Everything's fine." He returned holding my phone, then pulled out his own and dialed a number. "Here's the plan," he said, while waiting for the call to connect. "I've got a buddy who drives a moving van. If he picks up, we can haul this massive piece of furniture out of here tonight. What do you think?" I didn't care anymore. Not about my parents' wishes to keep the antique furniture, nor about what my sister would think of me. I agreed instantly. Dennis nodded, asked if I had any heavy duct tape, and went back into the bedroom to secure the wardrobe doors so they wouldn't swing open during transport. An hour and a half later, his buddy pulled up in the van. The three of us hauled the heavy wardrobe down the hall, into the elevator, and loaded it into the back of the truck. Dennis sent Kate home in a cab, then walked over to me and whispered, "We need to burn this piece of garbage. It'll be easier that way and a lot safer. We'll handle it. Don't worry." "Thanks, guys," I said, shaking their hands. The driver climbed into the front seat, while Dennis pulled out a cigarette and lit it before hitting the road. "You guys don't think I'm crazy, right?" I mumbled, still burning with embarrassment. "It's just when I saw it." Dennis tilted his head, keeping the cigarette between his teeth. Terrifying eyes, yellow teeth, blood around the mouth. "Yeah, I saw it too." I choked on my own breath, instantly coughing. "Did you see its body?" I managed to squeeze out. "Yeah, I saw it," Dennis said, taking a massive drag that burned through a third of the cigarette. "Good thing I wasn't completely sober when I looked at it. Trust me, man, only fire is going to fix this. Nothing else will stop that thing. Just don't tell Kate. No need to bring her into this. She gets freaked out easily." I nodded silently, unable to find any words. Dennis climbed into the passenger seat, and the moving van rolled out of the courtyard, disappearing into the night. Since then, peace has finally returned to my uncle's apartment, and nothing has ever troubled me there again.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like and subscribe to Darkly Told for more videos like this. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. See you in the next one.